Aya was once positioned to be Square's flagship heroine, bridging horror, RPGs, and cinematic storytelling. At the time, she was Square's response to the likes of Claire Redfield and Jill Valentine, an icon who could help fuel their entry into survival horror, and then they dropped her harder than Rebecca Chambers. Despite her strength, complexity, and influence, Aya has been forgotten both by Square Enix and mainstream gaming. Today, we're going to uncover why, and retrace her journey from one of gaming's most compelling heroines to a tragic footnote in horror history. We need to fully set the stage for the game before we can even begin to talk about Aya Brea. Parasite Eve isn't a clean, original story the way that Resident Evil or Silent Hill were. Well, Resident Evil, kinda. It's actually a sequel to a Japanese novel written by Hideki Senna in 1995, a landmark piece of medical horror that explored mitochondria, human evolution, and body horror in some very unsettling ways. That book was a bestseller in Japan, and by 1997 already had been adapted to a live-action film. That actually wasn't that bad. We watched it recently. You can find it on YouTube. Square decided not to adapt the novel directly, but instead build their own Part 2. They transplanted the story from Tokyo to New York, connected it loosely to the novel's events, and crafted Aya Brea as both a fresh protagonist and a symbolic continuation of Senna's themes. It was an ambitious move. Square wasn't just experimenting with survival horror, they were planting their flag in a genre dominated by Capcom, but with their own unique cinematic spin. Aya herself isn't introduced as a chosen warrior, a genetic engineered soldier, or even a horror cliche. Instead, she's a grounded and relatable New York City cop with a sense of duty, discipline, and responsibility. And rather than opening with an action scene, the game disarms us with something human and ordinary. It's Christmas Eve, and Aya's getting ready for a date. Her destination? Carnegie Hall, to attend the opera. And that's when everything just goes wrong. During the performance, the singer Melissa transforms into Eve, an avatar of humanity's rebellious mitochondria. The audience burst into flames, screaming as their bodies combust in grotesque horror. People writhe and burn alive as Aya, stunned but resolute, is the only one left standing. It's a horrifying set piece and at the same time Aya's defining moment. Where everyone else runs, she steps forward. She's not just a bystander, she confronts the threat head on and survives the impossible. That moment crystallizes Aya's role. She isn't reckless, but doesn't shrink from danger either. She's not some cartoonish, invincible hero. She takes damage. She questions what's happening and suffers through it. She just keeps going. Her instincts are to protect, to fight, and to push back against forces that should be beyond human comprehension. She is a cop, yes, but she's also layered with vulnerability. Aya doubts herself and fears what's happening inside her, and she carries the emotional scars of everything she sees. The battle takes a toll on her, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that's what makes her more than just the stock heroine. Unlike many horror leads in the late 90s, Aya wasn't a caricature of hypersexualized figure. At least, not yet. She was attractive, but her presentation was built on strength, determination, and humanity. Okay, there was a little bit, but not a ton. Not a ton. Aya Brea arrives not as a larger-than-life icon, but as a woman caught in a nightmare who refused to look away. The first game gives Aya a complete character arc. Not a shallow action story like Bad Boys, but a narrative with emotional weight and personal stakes. We see her transformation from a by-the-book cop into someone who questions her very identity. She begins as a woman doing her job, partnered with a less than disciplined officer. But she evolves into someone who's larger than life, not because she wanted to be, but because she had no choice. The horror of Parasite Eve is rooted in something we all carry inside of us: mitochondria. In Senna's original novel, mitochondria decide that humanity's time is up and that evolution needs a violent push. The game spins that into Eve, who is seeking to take over humanity from within. Aya, tied to the survivor of the original book's events, is different. She's immune to Eve's powers and even develops strange abilities of her own. That immediately raises questions that aren't easily answered. What makes someone human? Is Aya still human, or is she something else entirely? Has she become a monster, something more than human, or even something less? Aya is a fascinating contradiction, both weapon and victim. She can fight back against the horror, but she didn't choose the role to be in it. She was thrown into it. She bears the burden of being humanity's defense while also being the living reminder of its fragility. In 1998, this was revolutionary. Resident Evil 2 had just launched, and while that game was a huge success, its characters aren't designed with the same depth. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 2 is by far my favorite in the franchise. Claire Redfield was fun, but thinly drawn, built on campy dialogue and pulpy storytelling. Aya, by contrast, was built on realism. Her trauma felt grounded, her struggle felt personal. And that's what made her stand out in a landscape where horror heroines are more archetype than person. Parasite Eve 2 marked a drastic change for the series, and not just in gameplay. The RPG mechanics were stripped back in favor of tank controls and survival horror gameplay, much closer to Resident Evil. Aya 2 was changed, and not entirely for the better. Some of the emotional complexity from the first game was sidelined, replaced with a colder, more hardened exterior. By this point, Aya is no longer a New York cop. Now she's part of the FBI, assigned to the MIST unit, an organization created to hunt down mitochondrial creatures. She's hardened by her ordeal, emotionally distant and more isolated than ever. And that distance makes sense. How could anyone relate to what she's been through? She's more prepared, more tactical, and in some ways more accepting of what she's become. This mirrors the shift in gameplay. Aya is less of a character navigating trauma and more of a soldier executing her duty. It works more mechanically, but it comes at the cost of some of the depth that made her resonate in the first game. Still, Aya's presence matters. At a time when other franchises were discarding their heroines or rotating leads, Jill Valentine being absent from Resident Evil 2, Sierra even swapping protagonists between Phantasmagoria titles, Aya provided continuity. She remained the face of the franchise, which made her unique. This is where Aya's story collapses. The third birthday is divisive, to say the least. Some people enjoy it, but most see it as the moment Aya was undone. The shift in game philosophy is jarring. Gone are the RPG mechanics. Gone are the survival horror elements. By 2010, the industry had moved on, and Square wanted to keep up, so they turned Aya's story into a cover-based shooter with flashy mechanics. The overdive system, body hopping, and other soldiers felt disconnected from what Parasite Eve had been. Aya herself is completely unrecognizable. The twist reveals that during her wedding to Kyle, Aya's sister Eve saves her by using mitochondrial powers to swap bodies. That means technically the player isn't controlling Aya at all, or playing as Eve inside of her body. That explains the drastic change in personality. The heroine we'd known was effectively erased. Fans were alienated. Instead of the hardened FBI agent that we had played, the woman who had saved the world twice, we ended up with a timid, fragile portrayal with jarring sexualization. Aya, or rather Eve and Aya's body, was shown in humiliating scenarios, even to the point of near fetishistic depictions. It was a betrayal of the character Square had built across 2 games. Even if we put aside the bizarre body-swapping plot, the depiction of Aya is almost cruel. Gone is the strong, complex heroine, and in her place is this passive, infantilized figure bearing little resemblance to the Aya Brea fans admired. Square never seemed to understand what they had with her. The first 2 games gave us a heroine unlike anything else in horror gaming, but the third birthday showed us little care Square had for preserving her legacy. Even the first game, as groundbreaking as it was, had hurdles. Its short length, its RPG system kind of alienated survival horror fans, its odd pacing meant it appealed to a very niche audience. Horror fans found it too complex sometimes, and RPG fans found it too short, and it ended up caught kind of in between. Square's portfolio quickly left no room for Aya. Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts dominated, becoming cultural juggernauts. Meanwhile, Parasite Eve faded into obscurity. Aya was left stranded in a franchise that Square just didn't seem to value or know how to handle. Today, it doesn't even seem like she's acknowledged in the company's broader legacy. Aya Brea, the heroine of 2 groundbreaking horror games and the tragic casualty of a third, remains one of horror gaming's most compelling figures. She was layered, complex, and human in ways few characters of the late 90s seemed to be. She paved the way for more nuanced heroines, but never received the recognition she deserved. If there's any justice in the current horror revival, Aya Brea deserves a second chance. Horror never really forgets its ghosts. Whether Square Enix ever acknowledges her again is anyone's guess, but her legacy lingers in every survival horror game that dares to make its heroine more than just a character. Either way, stay scared, stay curious.